some of the first conversations that I had with my investors, I jumped into the granular. I wanted to prove to them that I knew exactly what I was talking about. I knew these numbers forwards and backwards, and this was a great deal. And they just kind of were looking at me like, what in the world is Nate talking about? And I said, okay, let me back up. Do you know what a syndication is? And let's start there. And so words of advice. I mean, there are so many different avenues to get into the business, right? But you need to
Hmm.
jump, you need to identify what you have done, your experience thus far, regardless of how vast or not it is, and leverage that moving forward. And one thing that I did well that has allowed me to gain momentum this year is have conversations with investors and really stoke those fires so that when the deal does come along, they're ready to jump on it. If you're starting to raise capital when you have a deal, then it's too late. I'm sure you hear that all the time, but again, that's how I've been able to develop momentum this year, is having conversations early and often with investors, potential investors. I mean, they just need to be continuous. And if you don't have a deal in hand, then you need to talk about one that you've done or a potential deal, because that needs to be ready to go. So with the Michael Blanc program, I think that it's just allowed me to bounce ideas off of, like, the mentorship group. We've got weekly calls, and you can jump in. You have dialogue with those guys and gals who are doing the same thing, and kind of develop a game plan from that. And you can set goals and achieve those goals, and they're right there to help you do that. So that's a little bit how I've gotten started.
I love it. I love it. So you touched on something that I want to speak on you about. You advise about raising capital, how so many people have, because a lot of us are doing this with other people's money, right? You have a financial fiduciary responsibility. And that being said, were you comfortable talking about money? This came up on my previous discussion, where some people have a hard time speaking about hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, and they have this kind of unconscious bias towards money, like, oh my God, 34 million, 36 million, I'm asking this much money, or they're spending from their own pocketbooks or whatnot. Does that make sense? Were you comfortable speaking about large amounts of money and requesting this from people? And if you were or you're not, how did you get comfortable in speaking with your investors and speaking on about large amounts of money?
Definitely, great question, and I've heard that a lot from guys that are a little bit greener as well, and it's a valid concern. But I lean on my experience. I've come from the sales background. I've bought and sold land in the oil and gas business for many years. I've been in medical sales for many years, so I've purchased or sold to a wide variety of folks, and I think that's what allows me to have a little bit of confidence to go in and say, hey, you're not asking somebody for money. You're presenting them with an opportunity for a credible investment. So I think these guys that we're talking about, these theoretical people, they need to realize what it is they're discussing. And what they're discussing is an incredible opportunity to invest in an asset class that's not going anywhere. I mean, rents aren't going down. That just doesn't really happen. So it's a vehicle for people with some capital set aside to create passive income. I mean, mailbox money is what we're looking for. That creates freedom, financial freedom, and keep that in mind when you're talking to folks, because that's worth putting a lot of money into. Something that can allow your future to open up. So I try to keep all of that into perspective. So I guess back to your original question of how do you talk about these large sums of money? Pretend like they're not large sums of money. Talk about it in a dollar versus $100,000, or $1 versus $1,000,000. It's all relative. The people you're talking to, they're aware of what it took to get it, the value of it, and all that. So if they have that value set on their hard work and how they earned it, they're going to have the same mindset in how they value it in an investment, and they want these types of investments.
You hit the nail on the head. So you also said something earlier that I want to stretch out too. Speaking to your investors, not only when you have a deal, but just to keep those lines of communication open, be the trusted resource, etc. And I know we're hearing this all over the place. And I know Michael has been asked this question numerous times, but I still want to hear your perspective and how you're having these conversations. So with inflation and the economy the way it is, and some of these deals being so inflated, and we feel that sometimes the sellers aren't really aware that, hey, you realize with the interest rates and all that's happening, and you still want top dollar for this property. I've noticed some of our investors are they're clutching their purses a little bit, and even me, for one, I feel I'm having a hard time getting them to realize, hey, now is as good as time as any. Our underwriting is solid. How are you educating your investors that regardless of the state of the economy, this is better than keeping your money in the bank?
I try to generalize it, to be honest. And I heard something recently from a friend of mine and syndicator said, you need to be able to explain these deals to a golden retriever. and I completely agree, because it might be oversimplified, sure, absolutely, but at the same time, a lot of the people that you're talking to, a lot of potential investors, most all of them have full-time jobs that aren't in this space. And so if you start jumping into the granular details of hundreds of a percentage of an IRR, or what all these interest rates are doing and how it's going to be affected, a lot of times those are glaze over. And so you need to start at a real high level and give the overarching look of it. And something that I do is I try to take my own advice, start high level, and then I'll get as granular as they'd like to. But in order for that to develop, you need to let them kind of lead the charge. And that's something that I made plenty of mistakes, still making them, and hopefully less and less. But some of the first conversations that I had with my investors, who some of them invested in every deal I've had this far, so I guess did something right. But I also learned a lot from those conversations, in that I jumped into the granular. I wanted to prove to them that I knew exactly what I was talking about. I knew these numbers forwards and backwards, and this was a great deal, so on and so forth. And they just kind of were looking at me like, what in the world is Nate talking about? And I said, okay, let me back up. Do you know what a syndication is? And let's start there. And so I'm learning from myself in that, hey, start at a high level, build a baseline. And sometimes people don't want the granular. They want you or me to handle the granular details. Now, somebody who's more familiar with the investment profile of these types of deals, sure, let's jump into it. But I think you need to identify where your investors are with their knowledge on multifamily syndications.
No, you are 110% correct. 110% correct. Because I think sometimes, and I'm in a sales role as well. I've been in sales, marketing, negotiations for approximately 20 years. And what that has taught me is always, I don't think they have an acronym, is it WIFM? What's in it for me? And I think that's what we have to do for the investors, tell them what's in it for them. What's the minimum, what's the cash on cash, what's the hold time, etc. Is this a value add? Am I going to have to wait a couple months before I see any types of returns, right? Is it preferred? So I think that is excellent, is kind of focusing on what's in it for them. And then if they have questions, they're going to ask you. And so if they want to know that granular micro level, and then that's a good time for you to shine, and you can provide that information, right?
Exactly.
So another question I have that you also discussing earlier today was a team, right? So you met people online, you met them in person. What do you feel is the most important in building a team? Because I speak with so many people who feel that they can go at this alone. And I go, that's absolutely phenomenal. If you can KP and raise equity or fund it yourself and do the due diligence, and you can, and you have a second attorney, high five, man. But for those of us who are not Superman, what do you recommend? What should you look for when you're looking for a team to take down these deals?
Fantastic question. I think that, I know that networking is I mean, the end all be all, especially in this business, in that you have to network your butt off. I mean, nonstop. I've been to countless seminars and meetings and get-togethers. I just got back from a meeting just a minute ago. It's just constant handshake and smiling and kissing babies, what I say. So you have to, and you get better at that. You get better, at first it's not super comfortable for a lot of people. Some people have the skill set, some people need to develop it a little bit more. And so you get better and better at it, but you need to put yourself out there and you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I didn't make that up, but I like the saying, and because if you're not putting yourself in a place to be uncomfortable, that means you're not growing. And so back to building a team, you need to meet a whole lot of people and pick their brains on a whole myriad of subjects so that you can understand kind of what you need. I've been super lucky to meet some great guys in the space, guys and gals, and I like to develop a relationship with them. Whether if I meet them virtually, I like to sit down face to face, either have coffee or lunch or dinner, or have a beer, whatever makes sense, and get to know them. Like let's talk about you and your family and your values and your morals before we jump into something else, and before we talk about business at all. I heard recently, I forgot where it was, but in other cultures overseas, we're both in the States, but overseas, that there's an average of 7 to 8 hours of relationship building before business is ever discussed. And I thought that was super powerful. I may not go 7 or 8 hours, but I definitely try to put in several hours before we talk about business, because I want to be aligned outside of the business so that we can be aligned inside of the business. And so once you find those folks that kind of align with you outside of the business, okay, let's start talking numbers. Let's talk deal structures. Let's talk on how you, do your underwriting. Let's how you property manage, how you asset manage, so on and so forth. So I think that's vital, at least with how I've gone about it.